Good evening, and welcome to the Mandel School's Advocating for Equity Spotlight Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us this evening. I am pleased to have you with us. I'm also really quite thrilled to have my former colleague and dear friend, Reverend Dr. Sarah Griffith Lund, with us this evening. I'm Dr. Sherry Warren, your host of the Spotlight Speaker Series, and I'm thrilled that you're all here. Hopefully I got this set up correctly this time. I'm still figuring out how Zoom webinar works. If you can, put your information in the chat, which is the ticket here. If I check the right boxes, I would love to see who is here with us this evening. So please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. I also want to point out that we have the question and answer section set up this evening. So if you do have a question for our speaker, go ahead and type that in the part of the menu that has a little dialog box that says Q&A with a question mark. And my colleague, Dr. Scott Wilkes, will be sifting through questions and comments for our speaker and helping me get them to Sarah. Sarah, thanks for being here with us this evening.
Thank you for the honor of being invited to be part of this conversation.
I greatly appreciate you making the time for us. And as you know, it is a fairly new conversation that we have started at the Mandel School to bring a variety of voices and social work backgrounds into the spotlight so that all of us can learn more about the types of careers that social workers engage in, as well as learn about important organizations, topics, and learn how we can advocate better for some of those topics. So, Sarah, would you mind sharing with our viewers what it is you do?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think of myself in 3 different roles. I am a pastor, so I'm a local church minister. I was ordained, 23 years ago into Christian ministry. And I'm also an author. And so I have a vocational call to create resources and materials for education and for building a beloved community, how to love our neighbors. And then I'm also an advocate. So this topic of advocacy is really at the heart of who I am. And I advocate as a family advocate, as a self advocate, and as a faith leader, as an advocate. And those roles really overlap nicely. And so that's really in my training. I went to graduate school at Princeton Theological Seminary in a Master of Divinity, but they partnered with Rutgers University. And I got a master's in social work as a dual degree program. And I like to say that I feel like the social work degree program at a graduate level prepared me so well to do work in the community, caring for our neighbors, understanding systems, and really to be a better advocate.
Thank you. I'd always wondered what order these things happened in, so they happened simultaneously.
Yes, at the same time. So in seminary, I would do an internship at a church in Brooklyn, New York. And then for my social work program, I interned at Women's Space, which was one of the first agencies that supported survivors of domestic violence. And I was involved in case management, one-on-one crisis counseling, and supporting small groups, support groups. And that was an incredible experience. And I think about the people's stories that I heard every day. And then in seminary, I did an internship at a women's prison. And so that was also, using a lot of social work skills. And there's just so much overlap. And so I think it's interesting in the space of advocacy to really think about people's cultural backgrounds, including whatever religion or faith that has formed their values. And one thing I've always admired about social work are the ethics. Social workers have such a robust ethics that we study, we learn about, we navigate, and we're led by. And I think faith communities could learn a lot from the social work ethics. And so in some of the resources and the books I write really tries to blend What would ethics look like applied to faith and to advocacy?
Well, that's fascinating. So I know that Rutgers has a lot of programming and specific work that is very feminist in nature and that focuses specifically on the needs of women. Just last week, I spoke with Christian Nunez, the president of the National Organization for Women. I have to get you two together sometime.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Well, I'm curious, Sarah, how did you discern your call to both ministry and social work, particularly this advocacy work?
My call really started as I began to be aware of my own life experiences and the types of family I was born into. So I was born into a middle class family. My father was an animal doctor. My mom was a public school educator. And we were doing pretty well as a family until my dad's brain disease began to really dismantle his life. And he became disabled from his untreated bipolar disorder. And now I know that one reason he didn't seek treatment was he had a symptom called anosognosia that did not allow his self insight into his bipolar symptoms. And so anytime we tried to get help for him, he would deny that there was a problem, even though it was really evident he wasn't able to work. It really was unweaving relationships. And so I would say my social worker identity was really born as a person navigating a family system where this just wasn't making sense, and we weren't getting the help we needed. That was the big thing. We would go to school and nobody was talking about bipolar at school in the 80s. We would go to church and nobody was talking about mental health at church. At church, they talked about God's love, and at school, they taught me about Shakespeare, but nobody was helping our family navigate my dad becoming homeless. We became homeless. My mom had to get a job as a substitute teacher, and I'm one of 5 kids. And so we were looking at dividing us up, and some of us live with grandma and some of us live with an aunt. And so there were just not the systems in place to help us navigate what was happening to our family. And so I became a minister and a social worker to offer support and resources to people who are navigating mental health and disabilities. So a call to better equip faith leaders, but also our whole community. And I realized that there is a role in our society for faith, that people are deeply motivated by their faith. And so, how can we help equip and train faith leaders to serve our community, especially people marginalized because of untreated serious mental illness, which lead to disabilities, which leads to homelessness, like my dad was homeless. And then my dad died in an indigent care facility. We were terrified that he would die alone, in his truck under a bridge somewhere, and we'd never know. But thankfully, he died at a nursing home for poor people. But that shouldn't be the way that people are experiencing disability and mental health. He really didn't have all the supports that he needed to get the help he needed. So it's a very personal story that motivates me. And the reason why, when I was looking at social work options and all the career opportunities, I chose to go the faith route because I needed to be grounded in hope. And so for social workers, there's a lot that can be overwhelming. There's so much that can be discouraging. We face so many barriers and roadblocks. We see such intense harms and we see systemic harm. And it's easy to just feel like what we do doesn't matter. And so for me, I needed to be grounded in something that would continue to nurture this work. And for me, it's faith. And so that's why I want to be situated in faith, to know that I'm doing the good work of God, and that the things that I can't do, I entrust God to help with, and God helps me connect to other people who are also the helpers. And I also wanted to be a minister who could preach and teach and encourage the helpers. So I tend to be in congregations where there's social workers, we have firefighters, we have nurses, we have teachers, we have activists. And it's really meaningful to me to be their pastor because I can pray for them, I can encourage them, I can listen and hear about their frustrations and also their joys and about how meaningful the work is that they do.
Well, and it sounds like you minister to a lot of people who um, have a great possibility of exposure to trauma. I'm curious, how old were you when you realized this was your calling?
I was about 12 years old when I first saw a woman minister. And so I had never seen a woman pastor until we made our move. I was born in California, but then with my dad's illness and everything coming apart, my mom moved us back to Missouri to be with family and went to church there. And it was a progressive church. Woman was the associate pastor and she was doing the Holy Sacrament of Communion. And to me, that was so profound. She happened to be about 8 months pregnant, holding the communion loaf, over her child, um, breaking the bread and talking about the body of God given to us. And that image of her doing that just opened my eyes and heart to this possibility for me that I could also be a person to share God's love.
Did you ever get the opportunity to tell her about her influence on your life?
We have maintained such a close bond. She was at my ordination service and helped ordain me. She helped marry
Mhm.
me and my husband. She's my son's godmother. And we're in touch regularly, praying for each other and encouraging each other. The Reverend Kim Gage Ryan. So I think we all have people, right, who have encouraged us and nurtured the best in us. And it's such an honor to be under her care. And then for me to get to offer that care to others. And so another like social work thing that I do as a pastor is we've partnered with Butler University here in Indianapolis, where my church is. And every semester we get an intern from the university, and it's a justice and peace internship. And so during their time with us, we invite them to think about, what are their values related to justice and peace? And how might they organize people, educate people, and inspire people to live out those values? So each student chooses a different topic to think and reflect about that. And I try to encourage their own sense of call and what's their vocation and how are they able to offer their gifts in the service of our fellow humanity, really. And that's for me what social work is all about, caring for humanity, believing in the best in everyone, and that everyone deserves an equal opportunity to be their best selves in the world.
So beautifully said. I can hear your authorship in your words. Some people have the gift and skill of putting words together eloquently, and you are so good at that, Sarah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Social work also tends to have a great focus on resiliency, and I know that ministry does as well. What are your reflections about the meaning and value of resiliency? And follow up, how has that been present in your own journey?
Well, I remember sitting in class at Rutgers in the social work program and doing all kinds of case studies and really thinking through some difficult scenarios. And the role of the social worker is to understand the depth and the complexity of all the issues and systems, and then also say, where's the opportunity for positive change? And so I think I loved that and the role playing that we would do. How would you role play in this situation? And what would you say and do as a social worker with this family or with this child, right? There's always something we can do. And so I love that. Social workers, we don't give up. We will not give up on you. There's always a better way. We will find it. And I think in my faith, the scriptures, our biblical text, the Hebrew scriptures, the New Testament. I love the psalmist, and so there's a Psalm 23. And it's even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So this idea that we're going through a valley of shadows, whether it's death, disease, joblessness, discrimination, and we're afraid, rightly so. But there's a promise that we're not alone and that we have a companion that will go alongside us until we get out of the valley. And really, that's what a social worker does. So you could say that's a beautiful model of God as a social worker, Jesus as the social worker. And so that's really encouraged me to remember I'm not alone. I have an advocate in God, and then we can be advocates for each other.
Thank you. What are some of the issues that you're currently advocating for and some of the people that you advocate beside and on behalf of?
Well, I don't always wear my clergy collar like I'm wearing today, but I had a reason to wear it today, so I'll share that story. Here in Indiana, I am part of a network, and so this is good community organizing. We organize faith leaders whenever there is legislation that we feel is against our values of loving our neighbors. And so we have a Senate bill that is deconstructing the current DEI opportunities in higher education, especially public universities. And so they want to ban public universities from being guided by DEI principles in their trainings. And so I was there to speak to that, but more than me, there were about a dozen medical school students from Indiana University School of Medicine. They spoke as individuals, but they each one of them had a story about how important DEI was to their medical training and to them as physicians. And I gave my testimony as a family advocate. I get to be part of a LEND program. I'm not sure if you or the listeners are familiar with LEND. It's a federal program that universities have, and it's to educate folks about neurodevelopmental disabilities. And so I started it in the fall, and it's ending this spring. It's at Indiana University School of Medicine. And so I wanted to share about that. It's for leadership education in neurodevelopmental disabilities, LEND. And I was in the program as a family advocate. We started in the fall, it ends in April, but in January, all of our curriculum was canceled because part of being an advocate for neurodevelopmental disabilities has to do with diversity. It has to do with inclusion. It has to do with equity. And so literally their whole half of their curriculum that we were going to focus on this spring semester was canceled because of the threats about the DEI laws from the federal government. And so one of our presenters, she said, I was asked to come and talk about DEI, but because of the current situation, I'm being censored. And so she presented her slides with her original materials, but she put black boxes over all of the content that was being censored. And it was about 3/4 of her presentation. And this was for a whole cohort of speech therapists, occupational therapists, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, all of these students who are training to serve the public, and they're being denied their education. And so I wanted to share my testimony as a family advocate. So I have family members with disabilities. And I'm very concerned that if people being trained in the universities aren't able to learn about the different cultures, including disability culture, that's a disservice specifically to my family. And I had one situation where a professor was talking about disclosing a diagnosis. And what is it like when you're telling a family that their child, for example, has autism or is autistic? And what are the best practices for giving a diagnosis? And the professor made some kind of comment that, be prepared that sometimes families get emotional and the mom might start to cry, and they all started to laugh. And as the family advocate in the group, I'm the crying mom. And so to experience this situation where they're laughing about giving a diagnosis and then having emotional family members, that really hurt. And so what that showed me is we don't need less DEI training. We need more. Like we need to talk a lot more about diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it's race, gender, disability, whatever it is. We have so much more to learn and grow. So that's one thing I did today was advocating at the Indiana State House. I'm also serving my denomination, the United Church of Christ, as a mental health and disability advocate. And so I work across the country with advocates in their faith communities. And together we partner with our DC office to help us think through, what are our key issues to be advocating about. But the most powerful way to come at it, I have found, is through stories. And so that's what you've heard me share a lot is what are our personal lived experiences that we can speak with clarity, conviction, and with truth about. So it's really hard to deny someone their own truth. That we have scars. We can show you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your work today at the State House in Indiana. Much appreciated. I know one of the ways I found myself engaging with advocacy was when I worked for faith communities, and I had never been brought up to have an understanding that faith communities could be an incredible pathway to and platform for advocating for the least among us, as it is often talked about. And you just mentioned the DC office. I think it might be helpful to viewers to think about what kinds of things happen at DC offices. Last week, the president of the National Organization of Women talked a great deal about her work in DC at the Capitol and working with our federal legislators. When did you develop an understanding that there was a way for faith to address the needs of people through policy and advocacy to our legislators?
So there's another part of my story. My dad, who had bipolar disorder, he also had family members who tragically, my cousin was on death row. And so this is on my dad's side of the family. My cousin was found guilty of murder when he was 20 years old. And in Missouri, when they heard his hearing, they disregarded the fact that he had a lifelong mental illness, that he was abused sexually, physically, emotionally as a small child, and never received the help he needed, and that he was not of his right sound mind when he committed the murder. Irregardless of all of that, Missouri sentenced him to death. He was on death row for 10 years. And so when he was 30 and I was graduating from seminary, I was a first year at the Rutgers School of Social Work. He and I were pen pals. He wrote me a letter and he said, Sarah, will you come? They have scheduled my execution. I want you to come to be my spiritual advisor. I want you to witness my execution. This was during finals week at Princeton, my senior year. So I asked my professor, I said, I know you don't know this about me, but my cousin's on death row. He's being executed the same week as finals week. He wants me to go. What do I do? And the professor said, you need to go. That's holy ground. So I went, and my friends at the seminary, they held a candlelight vigil during his execution. That's the power of faith. Because I can tell you 100% in that death chamber, There was no spirit of God that I could see or feel. It was devoid of God's goodness. And the reason why I made the connection with advocacy and faith is because so-called Christians were for the death penalty. Even though in that 10 years of death row, he had had a change of heart. He had been working with the chaplain in Bible studies. He was writing Christian poetry. He loved God. He was a changed person, and he was killed by the state of Missouri. And I watched his lethal injection, and it was very sanitary. It was all white, but it was like watching a murder. And I was asked to leave the death chamber. And the gentleman, the guard, he said, "Ma'am, don't forget your Bible." Because I'd set the Bible down beside me. And I said, "Don't forget my cousin Paul." And I walked out, was led out into the parking lot by the guards, and there was a cluster of religious folks with candles. They had been praying for Paul, but also praying for the victim's family, because in an interview, the victim's family said, "We're glad that he was executed, but that didn't bring back my sister." So I was able to go back to seminary, take my final exam, but they also wanted me to talk about what I watched and experienced. So I gave a talk one night at Princeton Seminary, and the lecture room was like three-fourths full at night, and there were professors there, and I shared about the experience. And afterwards, I'll never forget, an international student came up to me and she said, "Wow, I cannot believe this happens in the United States." This was back in 2002. She said, "You all are so admired internationally for human rights as being human rights advocates, but this is how you treat your own people." From seminary, I went to Minneapolis, where I was an outreach minister and worked with a program for folks with serious mental illness. It was a drop-in day center. So I did activities, we had lunch, we also played bingo. And at that time, Minnesota was going to reinstate the death penalty. And so I was invited to come as a faith leader, and I gave my testimony at the Minnesota State House, talking about the value of every person as a child of God, and every person um, has the right to treatment, to recovery, to changing, to repentance, to growth. And they did not reinstate the death penalty. And so I have had these moments where, because of my experiences and because of my faith, and I can testify and give the stories that have been so powerful. And I've also seen how religion can be used for harm. And that's what's happening right now in this country in the name of Christianity. So-called values are being promoted that are anti-LGBTQ, anti-DEI. And it's really the opportunity to navigate, that there are multiple forms of Christianity, and we need to really make space to honor the differences, and that the Christian nationalism that is really taken hold is not accurate in terms of biblical interpretation, and it's not representative. But it's really on people like me to speak up, and it's not a time to remain silent. It's a time for people who have privilege and opportunities to do the work. And I feel like God has been preparing me to do this work.
And what powerful work it is, and what holy ground you have stepped on, and holy space you have created for others. We have a question from our audience. Good evening, Dr. Lund. Thank you for meeting with us this evening. What has been your experience in working across the aisle, so to speak, with other leaders of differing faiths, for example, Islamic or Jewish faith members, to assist you in your advocacy?
One of the things I love about Indianapolis, that's a great question, is that surprisingly for the Midwest, we have a very robust interfaith, multi-faith, multi-religious community. And we have the Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Coalition. So I'm a member of that. And earlier, I was part of an advocacy effort with that group. And we had a lobby day, and I attended, and I learned about a bill that get this, they wanted to introduce chaplains into the schools instead of social workers, instead of mental health workers. They wanted ministers to be the ones helping students. And this was a problem for a lot of reasons. It would be a lot of Christian ministers with no training about, how to honor diversity and different religious faiths. And so there are a lot of concerns we had. So with our multi-faith coalition, I was part of the testimony against a Senate bill to bring in basically Christian ministers in lieu of paying for licensed clinical trained folks. I'm also part of an organization that comes together across differences, and it's interfaith as well. Um, Indie Action Coalition is our new name. And 2 years ago, we came together around Senate Bill 1, which was about mental health funding. And I was invited to give a keynote at a mega church. It was mostly a Black community. And I was able to share my testimonies about mental health and how important emergency services are. And we also have a group with the Black Church Coalition that's talking about having folks trained in giving crisis care to Black communities. Really needs to have good training to make sure that's safe. And so, with the work in that larger coalition of diverse people, they passed Senate Bill 1. So, $1.5 million funding for Indiana for emergency and mental health care. So, I think those stories show you that there is so much more power when we come together around a common goal that we have shared values around. There are a lot of important differences that we have with different religions and different cultural groups, and it's important to honor those. And at the same time, we can find places where our values overlap and form powerful coalitions.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Some of my own legislative experience has been taking coaching from the lobbyists from the Kansas Cattlemen's Association, because we were in coalition around a similar issue that was affecting the human rights of people that just happened to overlap with people who were working in packing houses and the beef industry in Kansas. So I think the phrase is something like politics makes for interesting bedfellows or something like that. Well, coalition building is absolutely one of those places where we find those little overlaps of our values and our desired outcomes. It's interesting work, and it's incredibly powerful, as you've said. I am wondering, Sarah, right now seems to be one of those times where we need more advocates. A lot of the folks who have been pushed to the margins are being pushed possibly even further to those margins, and their voices being decentered even more. How do you manage, or how do you practice grounding and self-care for yourself and encourage others to be patient as we find ourselves called in so many directions?
I was able to take a sabbatical, and that's one of the gifts of being a congregational minister. And after 5 years of full-time service, I had 3 months of a sabbatical. And in my national advocacy role, I had 2 months. So for about 2 months, I was able to step away. And I think for all of us to find ways to have space for renewal, whether it's an hour, a day, a weekend, if you have that luxury of taking a few days. to renew our spirits. You know, we are not robots. We are not machines. We are flesh and blood. We have beating hearts that love and long to experience joy. And so there's been so much good work. The Nat Bishop Tricia Hersey has incredible work around the power of rest as our resistance. And so I've learned a lot from what she has had to say. And my sabbatical theme was about that joy and reclaiming joy in my body, reclaiming joy in my friendships, and reclaiming joy in my sense of who I'm called to be. And in that space, I was able to dream. And in that dream, I was able to think about my next book and this idea of blessed minds and celebrating God's diversity and how God created us to have different kinds of minds. And that's a good thing to be celebrated and to be encouraged and to be supported. And so part of the tactic is to exhaust us, is to discourage us, is to have us so angry and frustrated that that's where all our energy gets spent. And it can be very subversive and it can be a strategy to channel that frustration into loving each other. So there's a lot in disability communities about community care and how can we love on each other, you know, really love our friends and our family and find life in those loving relationships. Because I think the harder we love, the stronger we're going to be. Really believe that.
Mm, I'm with you there. I had the opportunity Friday night last week to go to the Case Western Reserve University Unity Dinner put on by our Office of Multicultural Affairs, which we still get to call that. And we had a speaker who's a local comedian and activist and philanthropist and just a really interesting guy. But the whole theme of the evening, I'm going to misword this, was something like, gotta laugh to keep from crying. And part of his talk, his name was Ricky Smith, part of his talk was about laughing and finding humor in life isn't denial, it's defiance.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, like what you've said, we need to love on each other harder. We need to reach out and take care of each other even better. And we need to find humor where we can so that we can keep this whole thing together and keep doing the good work that we do. My colleague Scott sending me another question. Coalition building and congressional testimony are valuable advocacy strategies. For those who might be intimidated or not have those particular skills, what are some other effective advocacy strategies that our new social workers can do?
There's a lot to be said about community education. And one of the reasons why I write books is to bridge the gap between the academy and laity. And so there's a lot of great research being done about the human brain, about mental health, about neurology, and about ways that faith can help build up resiliency. And that we have, you know, Lisa Miller is a professor at um, Columbia University. And she says we each have a spiritual docking port in our brain, and that our brain is wired to be spiritual. And there are ways to nurture our spirituality. She's Jewish, so she's not claiming any one religion, but just spirituality in general is a tool that can be used to help us. So I create resources to help have these conversations out in the community. And that's why faith communities are great spaces because they're out in neighborhoods across the country, urban and rural. There are little faith communities everywhere. And so I think social workers can ask yourself, what might your role be as a community educator? Because there's not going to be effective advocacy unless there's education about the issues. And you want our advocacy to be based on really good information. So whether you're sharing at a community fair, you're getting into the schools In terms of the topics I'm passionate about, disabilities and mental health, the research shows that in the schools is the best place to bring resources to disadvantaged kids who have a lot of barriers to care. And so school social workers do incredible advocacy. And so I would say, no matter where you're placed as a social worker, you can be an advocate. And a lot of times it starts through listening and listening to the stories that people are telling you about their lives and how that connects to our laws and how our laws can be changed. And that's really what an advocate does. We talk to our elected officials and we lobby for the changes that we want to see.
You remind me of my first faculty position back at Clark University in Dubuque, Iowa, where I taught policy and had been able to arrange, sort of piggybacking on a League of Women Voters event that happened once a month during legislative session, where all of our local legislators for the counties that were around us were invited, and they talked about what they'd been up to, and people could ask questions. And we arranged to have a lunch afterwards for our policy students. And they sat there terribly quiet. And finally, Pam Yoakum, wonderful senator, I believe she was, to Des Moines, said, "Oh, don't be afraid of me. I put my pantyhose on one leg at a time."
I love
said, "I'm
that.
just a regular person. I care about everything, just like you do. Tell me your stories."
Mm-hmm.
Just a regular old person.
Mm-hmm. Tell me your stories. That's the heart of it. And so social workers can be the ones listening, inviting, creating spaces and opportunities for the stories to be told, hearing them, understanding them, documenting them, whether it's video, audio, in writing. And you can write letters to the editor. Our congregation does Bread for the World, is an organization advocating for hunger justice. So we have a letter writing campaign, and we send dozens and dozens of letters that get collected with other faith communities to send thousands of letters, all advocating for WIC, for nutrition programs. And almost all of those letters contain stories, why this issue matters to me and to my family.
Well, I was born and raised in Kansas. And although I don't necessarily come from farmers, when I teach policy, I think every one of my students can probably tell you that the Farm Bill is my favorite piece of federal legislation.
Yes.
Yes, because I have one.
Yes.
The idea of supporting our farmers while also making sure that students have their tummies full and that pregnant people are able to feed themselves and take care of their babies. To me, that is one of the Maslow lower level needs, is making sure that we have our tummies full, because we can't learn over the sounds of our stomachs growling.
Definitely. And because I have a social worker's heart as a pastor, when I first came to the church, I started in March, and then in May was our Bread for the World Sunday. And they were kind of nervous because they said, Pastor, we're doing our Bread for the World Sunday, and that means your sermon needs to be a little shorter so that we have more time to write letters. And I was like, no problem. I understand that letter writing is holy and sacred, and I am happy to share the sermon time so that we can get our letters written in church.
And it still works.
It still
Writing
works. That's
letters
right.
works.
Phone calls, emails, handwritten letters, it really matters.
We have to tell our stories.
We have to tell our stories. And part of the work that I do too is to destigmatize disabilities and mental health, because there are certain stories that are hard to tell. It's hard to talk about my cousin's execution and that was my family member who was executed. My dad died because of complications of bipolar disorder. He lived unhoused. These are very hard things to say because there's so much shame, judgment, and stigma wrapped around all of that. And so by putting on a human face to these taboo topics, these stigmatized topic, it really humanizes it, and it helps people see we're not just this scary thing or this statistic, that we're everyday people, we're your neighbors, we're your pastor, we're the person next cubicle. We are here. There's a lot of us, but we've been silenced and stigmatized on purpose, I think, to really keep our stories quiet. And so part of the movement work I do is this idea of breaking the silence, having these conversations in community about what our true stories are, and sharing those true stories is a form of healing. And there's a lot of hope when we connect to each other. We create a network, we share resources, and that's how we build power.
That's fantastic. And Adeline, I see your question in the chat. I'm curious if Sarah just answered that to some degree. If not, please type it in again about community education and religion. Sarah, I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about your new book on neurodiversity.
Thank you.
It seems to be it's part of a series-ish.
Yeah. Yeah. So, part of what I'm doing too as a social work pastor is trying to destigmatize mental health and disabilities. And in religious culture, theologically, the way we talk about God and mental health and disabilities historically has really been based on ignorance about the human body and the human brain, and where disability comes from and where mental health diagnoses come from. So before we had the science to know, there were thoughts that people who um, had bipolar disorder, like my dad, maybe he had an evil spirit, and he needed to have an exorcism, or maybe he's that way because he sinned, or he was cursed by God. And so these were the things that the church used to think and teach. And so we have a lot of education to do around there's environmental causes, there's biological causes, there's situational causes to mental health diagnoses. It really isn't a curse from God. And so my work talks about being blessed as made in God's image, as people of God. Bipolar disorder is not a sin. It's not a punishment from God. It is just a human condition that the brain experiences. And so my work has been to break the silence about that. And my newest work talks about the framework of neurodiversity, which is a movement, it's a paradigm, it's not a medical model. It's really, I don't know what they're teaching now in social work schools about neurodiversity. It's a grassroots movement, and it's a way for people to self-identify. And I learned about it at Princeton Seminary. I was giving a lecture about faith and mental health and ministry. And I asked the professor, I said, so what's new? What are you hearing from your students? What are your students talking about? And he said, well, a lot of them are self-identifying as neurodivergent. And I just paused. We were walking to lunch and I stopped on the sidewalk and I looked at him and I said, what? He's like, yeah, neurodiversity. They are being diagnosed in college and high school as autistic, ADHD, PTSD, dyslexia, all these things. They're coming to graduate school, they're coming to social work programs, ministry programs with these diagnoses, with these sense of identities. And I realized that in my context, the church, we're not prepared uh, to receive the blessings of folks who are neurodivergent in a way that honors all their gifts. So I wrote Blessed Minds as a resource to educate folks. What is neurodiversity? What's the paradigm? How can we embrace this as an opportunity to see mental health and brain differences as true blessings and not to stigmatize it? But to say, all of our brains are different. And for some of us who are neurodivergent, we need some accommodations. And I realized that that's me. I have complex PTSD, which in that big umbrella of neurodiversity fits in there. And a lot of things started to make sense when I realized what things I need in order to flourish. I get migraines from intense fluorescent lights. too much sound, too many people, too much overwhelm, my brain shuts down. I also need to have fidgets. I have lots of fidgets. This is a little fidget I have. It's a beautiful hand-carved wooden mahogany bird. And fidgets are great for lots of reasons, but for someone like me, who, when I get overwhelmed or stressed, I can disassociate, which means I just leave my body and I'm not fully present. But a fidget can help me be present in the moment, grounds me, helps me focus on being here with you. So those are just two examples, and I had a lot of fun with this book. I got to interview lots of folks around the country who are already doing in ministry that's neuro inclusive. And one fun interview was a pastor in Texas. Her daughter was diagnosed with autism, and the school she went to got a grant for how to better serve autistic students. And they bought stationary bicycles and put them in the back of the classroom. And she said her daughter loved it. And on the stationary bike, she could focus, she could hear the lesson, she could understand it and retain it. So the pastor thought, well, let's try that at church. So in the back of the sanctuary, they have the stationary bike. And she said, someone's always on it. It's popular. And so, that's a simple thing. It takes some resources, but something like, oh gosh, what are they called? They're like the felt wires, pipe cleaners. Yeah, she has like a
Oh,
basket
the
of,
nail stems.
yeah, she has a basket of these pipe cleaners that are fuzzy and they're little wiry things you can bend and twist. And she says those are popular. So those are like taken all the time. And it's just something that honors the different ways that we show up in spaces and what we need to thrive. I also heard sad stories, one from a friend whose son is autistic, and she was a new pastor to this church with her husband. And her son brought his fidget into the Sunday school classroom. And the teacher said, "You can't have that in here." And he got upset. And she said, "I'm sorry, I'm taking that away from you." And she grabbed it from him and put it on a top shelf that he couldn't reach. And he just had a meltdown. And so the pastor tried to explain to the teachers who were retired school teachers, that this was an accommodation that he used at school and it really would help him in the Sunday school room. Well, it turned into a huge power struggle, and the pastor's family left the church. It was so harmful to the child that he even said to his mom, "I don't know if I could go to church anymore. I don't know if that baptism I had at that church um, was meaningful because they didn't love me." So thankfully, she's at another church that is really interested in neurodiversity and being inclusive for all different kinds of people, and he's thriving, and he's doing really well, and he has his fidgets, and the folks have been educated about why these things are important for inclusion. So it's a important conversation that also I hope destigmatizes mental health. I also have suicide loss in my family of a young person who was 16, and she had ADHD, and there was a lot of stigma that she faced. She also was a straight A student, AP honors classes, but she did not get all the support that she needed. And I wish that I had been able to talk to her about her beautiful brain and how blessed she is, and that there's more that the school and that her family, the more we could do to support her. But she had so much pain that she held inside, and when she died by suicide, it just shook me to my core. And so I wrote a book, Blessed Youth, which is about children and teens and how to prevent suicide. And so Blessed Minds is the next level, still thinking about prevention and destigmatizing difference and brain differences and really celebrating them.
Sarah, it sounds like your work is truly the embodiment of a strengths-based perspective.
Yes, yes, good social work. Yeah, it's really fun. So I think for you all as social workers, think interdisciplinary too, like other disciplines that you can combine to inform your work, but also to inform that other discipline. So I've found a lot of enjoyment and opportunity in those spaces of intersection. There's a lot of need for a social work informed view of other things that we do. And there's a lot of gifts that you all bring from your social work background and experiences.
Sarah, this has been such a wonderful conversation. And before I let you go tonight, I'm wondering one last thing. What resources would you recommend? Or is there a website, a podcast, an author besides yourself in particular that you think would be helpful to folks who are trying to develop their own advocacy skills, or looking at working at the intersection of faith and justice and equity?
Well, I do like Lisa Miller's work. So if you're looking to learn more about brain research and science and spirituality, The Awakened Brain is her newest book. Um, Also, Mental Health America is another resource that is really important because they have online free screenings and it's used around the world. And the highest population group that is using this are young adults. So young adults are Googling their symptoms and they're finding Mental Health America's screening. And after you do the screening, it gives you a link to all kinds of personalized resources for help. The other thing that I'm part of is 988. So in my advocacy work, I was invited to be on the marketing and communications committee, and so 988 is a text call helpline, and it's not only for acute crisis, it can be a warm line. And so it's also a place to reach out to have that human connection.
Thank you for bringing up those resources. I have masters in social work friends who work for both Mental Health America of the Heartland in Kansas City and the 988 line in northern Wisconsin.
Wonderful.
And
Wonderful.
I'm proud of the work they do. Well, Sarah, it has been a lovely evening. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for your deep sharing of how you came to this work.
Thank you so much. And I'm encouraged by you and by the good work you're doing and by your students and how each one of us are bringing goodness into the world and care and compassion and empathy and love. And those things really matter and they're powerful. And so be encouraged that what you're doing is good and important. And I thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Scott is going to share a slide. We like to collect your thoughts about the conversation that you have just experienced and any other topics that you think would be interesting to highlight here in the Advocating for Equity Spotlight Speaker Series. You can scan the QR code and it will take you to a very brief survey. The QR code, and if you don't know what a QR code is, it's that box with all the funny dots around on it and the little Case Western Reserve starburst in the middle. The one down in the corner will take you to our events page and let you know what other kinds of things we have going on at the Mandel School currently. Sarah, again, my wholehearted thanks. I've known you for a few years now, and I knew you were special when I met you. I am so moved that you were willing to share some of your story with people that I care about and can reach out to tonight so that we continue to share the stories and make a difference. Such an honor. Thank you all for being with us this evening. Sarah, I'll check in with you in a couple of days and see how things are going. And the rest of you, well, and Sarah, have a fantastic evening and a powerful week. Good night.